William, unsettling events in Hungary when we heard that the Force India team had gone into administration. While that was going on, you were actually with the administrators in a hearing in London, right?
Absolutely, yeah. When we last spoke, and I'm sure you know, for the last 6 months we've been trying to buy the team. We had a contract to purchase the team in May. For one reason or another, largely legal, we'd been prevented from so doing by the lawyers on their side. Things came to a head on Thursday night when we went to sign the contract to purchase the team. And we were made aware of the extent of the freezing order on the parent company shares. And I went along to court on Friday. Was actually the only party to go independent from the team to actually put £30 million down as sponsorship to help the team continue and stave off the administration. Unfortunately, with the weight of creditors that were there at court, it was deemed that it was better for the company to go into administration, which we're very disappointed about, and I feel personally was wholly avoidable, and a rather sort of tragic outcome, although let's wait and see how that plays. And I was in court on Friday, and things have moved very quickly, but we're pretty shocked at some of the things that are emerging and how it's all come about.
I was going to say, there are a lot more creditors than you knew 3 months ago?
Well, I mean, we're aware of the team wasn't in a fabulous position financially, and that the finances were probably parlous. But we certainly weren't aware that there was a concerted effort to get these creditors together and actually mount an effort to bring the team into administration, which duly came to pass.
It is extraordinary in one sense, in that Force India have finished fourth in the Constructors' Championship for the last 2 years, which means they've been beaten only by Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull. They've done sensationally well for a small team with a relatively small budget, and they haven't been able to find the finance and the funding to run it as they should, even at this level, let alone to grow. And that doesn't say much about the strength of the industry at the moment.
Well, I think there's two questions there, aren't there? I mean, there's other teams, for example, McLaren, who have quite publicly struggled to find a title sponsor. So there is potentially a malaise afflicting the sport. Maybe a general economic one in terms of reduced sponsorship revenues in many sports. Obviously, television viewing figures are a factor in that. But I think, in terms of Force India, they obviously had very passionate shareholders. I think Vijay personally is, a fantastic, guy in terms of he's a hugely enthusiastic racer. He's very resilient. He's very passionate.
Well, he's very resilient. All the stuff that's going on, and he's just kept going, trying to support the team.
Indeed, I think he's spent 10 years building this team to, as you say, being a regular on the podium and top 4 in the sport. So his passion for the sport and for Force India is unquestionable. I think if he's guilty of anything beyond perhaps running things in a slightly kamikaze fashion financially, would actually be potentially believing his lawyers and perhaps trusting those closest to him.
Quite weighted words there. I won't go any further down that avenue, but tell us about, from your point of view, you've got the purchase money, and you believe you've got the sponsorship you need for the team to carry forward and to grow.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's probably worth mentioning, a lot of people have said Rich Energy is quite a new business. We're only 3.5 years old, although it was in development for some period of time before that. How on earth are they in a position to buy a Formula One team? And I think there's been quite a lot of commentators within the sport and the wider world who've queried that. There's an awful lot of very senior people in the sport who've seen our money and are well aware that we are more than capable of buying the team, and we're certainly ready to do so, and we absolutely want to be in Formula One. But I mean, I think for the wider world, I mean, we've actually got, although our shareholdings are confidential because the parent company is offshore, although we're a British business and everything's centred in London, we've got 4 sterling billionaires who sit behind the business. So we are in a position where we have a lot of liquidity. We decided, as I said to you before, that Formula One would be a great place for our marketing as a platform. So we were ready to buy Force India in May. We'd agreed a deal. I feel actually, I hate to say it, really quite sorry for the shareholders actually, because I think they've been bounced into a situation.
The shareholders of Force India.
Indeed, so Sahara, Vijay Mallya and Michael Moll. And I think that, there's been a little bit of a Machiavellian game afoot, and administration has come to pass.
What role, if any, are Mercedes playing at the moment? We know from your documentation, what we heard, that they are a creditor as well.
Yeah, well, I think the largest creditor is now public, I think, are actually the current shareholders, who are owed 159 million, which is 16 times what Mercedes are owed. So to put it into context, that's quite interesting. What's the role of Mercedes now? I think that's the million-dollar question. I think they've obviously got a wonderful engine and a wonderful motorsport team, which is why it's such an asset for any particular team on the grid, Mercedes Power. They obviously run a very, very good company. I think perhaps, as any company would be, they're frustrated at perhaps late payments on some of their engines. Obviously, they've also lent the team, in the case of Ocon, a driver. And Force India are the beneficiary of the Mercedes Performance Driver Programme. So I think Mercedes are a corporate entity. Their role is, certainly at a board level, is to try and be neutral. Obviously, there are employees of the company at a lower level who perhaps have their own agendas.
So where are we at now in terms of your potential purchase and indeed other groups?
Well, I mean, I think, we were the only people, as I said, went to court on Friday. We put £30 million lodged with the judge. We were the only party to do so. Everyone else was on the other side of the court, effectively petitioning for an administration, including, remarkably, one of their drivers, Sergio Perez. The company and the team are now in administration. That's a formal legal process. The administrators have been appointed. The process from here is that the administrators, their role is to ensure or secure the best possible deal for creditors, and also, where possible, ensure that the business is a going concern and can carry on trading, which is obviously going to happen in the next 2 weeks. So the administration period in this instance, I think, will be quite quick, because there are quite a lot of potential suitors. We are, without actually specifically outlining what our plans are, I can tell you that we want to be in Formula One. We've got the money to do so. We've got the business model and the business plan and the reasons to do it. Clearly, having spent 6 months working on Force India, we're not going to relinquish that overnight. So the administration period is going to be very interesting, and I think a lot will come out in the wash. And I'm happy to speak to you in a couple of weeks and see where we are.
But from your point of view, I would imagine it's more rational to be dealing with the administrators than with Force India as it was last week.
Well, in some ways, I mean, I think you could argue the toss on that one. I mean, I think there's pros and cons to anything. Certainly, the process is now simpler, and the means by which you can acquire this team is simpler. The external non-shareholder creditors account for only £46 million, which is actually, in real terms, a very small amount. It's less than half of the operating budget of the team for one season, which again gives succour to the theory that this was an unnecessary administration that could have been managed. So, quite frankly, if we write a cheque tomorrow for £46 million and do a deal with the shareholders, then that is obviously an angle. But, as I say, we need to take stock and work out what's the best way to proceed.
What's the danger for your shareholders to start getting bored, nervous about this whole thing because of the way it's going and the way the whole industry seems to be in turmoil?
Well, I think our model is based on a wider point. I mean, there's the old joke about, how do you become a millionaire? Start a billionaire, buy an airline. And that applies to a certain extent with Formula One. So you're not doing it on conventional grounds. If you had 100, 200 million pounds that you wanted to invest, you almost certainly wouldn't do it as just a pure investor in Formula One. However, we've got a consumer brand that's fast growing to promote. The two biggest drinks distributors in Europe have just delisted Red Bull in favour of Rich Energy. We are growing extremely quickly. We are going to be in Formula One. We hope it is with Force India.
What do you say to Formula One people who don't take you seriously because of the way you look or your background?
Well,
and there are people doing that.
Well, I mean, people are entitled to their opinion, aren't they? I mean, never judge a book by its cover. The more you know, the less you have to show. But I mean, if people want to be superficial and judge it, that's entirely their prerogative. I mean, we're not, obviously we have a wonderful drink that we hope people will try and prefer to Red Bull and Monster. That's our number one objective. In terms of an erratic hairstyle or whatever, I mean, quite frankly, it's absolutely irrelevant.
Can you give us finally a vision of how you would, if things went as you wanted to, how you see the team going into the second half of the year with drivers, sponsorship, and then developing, obviously, for 2019?
Well, on a personal level, I'd like to make the point that, I'd very much like to wish Vijay Mallya the very best. I get on very well with him, and I think he's actually a real passionate racer, and I hope he avoids what I think is now becoming a concerted witch hunt against him, and I think that's worth putting on record.
Right.
Certainly he's no angel, but I'd certainly think that's relevant. How do I see them going? I mean, I think it's entirely dependent on the funding. I mean, if they can get an injection of capital now and they can overcome the bottlenecks on aero development and they can get security in the workforce, I mean, I think that's going to be really important.
But do you think you can give them all that?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think one of the biggest issues for any potential purchaser now is retaining key staff. There are 4 or 5 superb technical staff in a brilliant team of 406 people that clearly are very influential in the performance. So retaining staff, maintaining confidence, injecting the capital. And we've also worth noting that we've got 3 corporate sponsors above and beyond Rich Energy who are going to come into the sport who are not currently in Formula One. So, you know, as I said, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. I think we need to be judged on what we achieve. If people want to doubt us in the short term, that's entirely their prerogative. But we're going to be in F1 sooner rather than later.
And if you did buy the team and it went ahead as you wanted to, would Sergio Perez remain in the team?
I think it would be dependent on contracts and dependent on conversations that we had as and when we were the owners. Clearly, it's inappropriate for me to comment on any employees at this stage when we're just an interested spectator.